Hi everyone. I am presenting for session 6, and the article that I'll be summarizing is by Terrence Wiley from the Center for Applied Linguistics about diversity, superdiversity, and monolingual language ideology in the United States, tolerance or intolerance. First, let's define linguistic diversity. Um, Linguistic diversity has many labels these days. It can be called languaging, polylanguaging, transidiomatic practices, metrolingualism, supervernacularization. Linguistic diversity is just diversity of language within a given area. And linguistic diversity came about from migration, and it's been perpetuated by technology and the need for social networking. Since 1980, linguistic diversity has increased. If you take a look at the chart at the bottom of the slide, it shows the percentage of households where language other than English is spoken. So our baseline is 1980, where there were 23.1% um, that spoke a language other than English. In 1990, it increased. 2000, another increase, and 2011, that there was an increase there too. So there's a steady increase of language diversity within the United States, and it has from 1980 to 2011, it's almost tripled in percentage. So again, since 1980, there have been major increases in Spanish and other non-European languages, and that increase was a result of the leniency of immigration policies that began in the 1960s. In the late 19th century, Mexican immigration increased because of more stringent Asian immigration laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act, where Chinese immigrants were prohibited from coming to the United States. So this migration created diversity in colonial regions in the New England and middle colonies. Those of English origin were the largest groups. However, if you look at the southern colonies, Africans represented the largest group. So just taking a look at 1776, the ethno-racial diversity percentages were 70.5 English in New England, 40.6 English in the middle colonies. However, if you take a look at the southern colonies, English represented only 37.4%, and Africans were 39.2%. So in the southern colonies, they were the majority. However, even though there was cultural diversity in the colonies, the dominant language in the United States was still English. And according to Gramsci, he called this the manufacture of consent. And what that meant was that there was the acceptance of mainstream ideas, the acceptance of English language and American customs without force. So, because of this English spread, not because there was any formal language policy, because at this point English was not the formal language, um, but as a result of status achievement, they believed that um, English language helped the colonies achieve government decisions, or it legitimated government decisions regarding acceptable language in politics, economics, and social affairs. So this leads us to the language tolerance hypothesis. For a long time, the United States has expected linguistic assimilation. which is where if you come to the United States, you speak English. However, is assimilation expected because we want speakers of the languages to be educated, or because we want them to participate in society and economy, or perhaps both of these things? Heinz Claus, who was a German historian and language demographer, argued that a policy climate of linguistic tolerance was prevalent over the course of most of U.S. history. However, his conclusion was based on formal language policies, but did not include ethnicity and race as part of language. So, what about the World War I era when there were restrictions on German and other immigrant languages? So, in essence, Claus's language tolerance hypothesis didn't include how language was used to control society, economy, and politics, and it was very separate from ethnicity and race. So that leads us to the underpinnings of discriminatory practices. And for this part, let me just clarify some terms here. Racialization, which means the distribution of privileges and obligations on the basis of race. And then, of course, racism, monoculturalism. Racism promoted monoculturalism, which is catering to a dominant culture. And then linguicism, which is using language to unequally divide power and resources. So this is where Arnold Leibowitz enters, and contrary to Claus's language tolerance hypothesis, Leibowitz posited that language restriction was directly aligned with racial and ethnic discrimination. It wasn't separate, because race could not be silenced, however, language could. So the Naturalization Act of 1790 limited citizenship to whites and those of European origin. Then, in 1831, the Supreme Court deemed Native Americans as domestic foreigners. They said that they were in a state of pupillage, which meant they needed to be tutored or mentored by whites in order to be civilized. This is where we begin linguistic acculturation or deculturation. So according to Wiley, language has played an important role in both the ideology and practice of the system of racial domination that held sway in the United States prior to the Second Reconstruction. In 1775, the Continental Congress gave $500 to Dartmouth College for the education of Native Americans. Again, Native Americans were thought of as uncivilized, so the government wanted to contribute money to their education in hopes to civilize them. In addition, Congress passed the Civilization Fund Act to promote basic literacy. They wanted the Native Americans to be trained on how to farm land, and they wanted to protect the Native Americans from extinction. In essence, what they were doing here was trying to keep them from needing more land. So over time, the Cherokees became literate. However, they were 80% literate in their own language and only 20% literate in English. So because of this, they were removed, and that is what we now know of as the Trail of Tears. 125,000 Native Americans, I apologize for that, were removed, and they were taken, I think it was to Mississippi. So after the Civil War, the United States forced Native Americans to assimilate. Native American schools, which used to be called normal schools. I actually attended the the University of North Carolina at Pembroke in North Carolina, which started out as an Indian normal school. It was to educate um, Native Americans on how to become teachers, but now it's part of the University of North Carolina school system. So these schools were established to force Native Americans to assimilate. To They were also forced to teach English language and customs. To go even a step further, Native American children were removed from their parents to prevent imprinting. And what that means is that they wanted to deculturize them, so that all of the customs, the language, the children did not have time to learn all of those customs and were forced to assimilate and take on American customs and take on the English language. This leads us to coercive assimilation, and Native American children resisted this coercive assimilation, um, being forced away from their families, being forced to learn English, being forced to assimilate to American cultures. Because they had been taught to hate the dominant culture, they resisted this coercive assimilation. Um, However, the United States government continued with force, and they in the Native American schools they could not speak their native languages. They had to speak English, and punishment was severe for those who did. They would actually wash their mouths out with lye soap if they spoke their native languages. So coercive assimilation caused many natives to lose their cultural identities because they were forced to assimilate. Um, Native Americans were removed, and they began establishing their own schools. So this is where we really began to see language as a marker of difference. And language was eventually linked to religious intolerance. And teaching English in schools was the way to fix foreign threats. If everyone um, learned English and everyone adopted American culture, then we didn't have to worry about foreign threats. Um, According to Wiley, the imposition of English education was often linked to anti-immigrant agendas. And what appears to have changed is that there's this acceptability of overt prejudice and discrimination as the basis of ethnicity and race. So I am ask what I'm asking, so sorry. That's my phone. What I am asking you, sorry for the interruption, guys. Back to questions for discussion, just thinking about language today. Um, I will use as an example a student in my class who came from Cuba, and she spoke no English. And one of the first things one of the teachers on our hall said is, why would her parents come over here and they don't speak any English? So just hold comments like that in mind and think about language in the context of your school community, and discuss how language and culture are treated in your school setting if you are in a school. Um, and are students for whom English is a second language encouraged to share their culture, or is the expectation to assimilate? And so I'd love to hear some feedback from you on that. And also reflect on English monolingualism as a defining characteristic of American identity. Are there advantages to such a characteristic?